Hey there, this is Tom with the Diogenes Lamp podcast. I appreciate you listening in, and most importantly, I hope you enjoy what you hear. Before we start with today's episode, I'm going to ask you for a small favor. Believe it or not, history podcasts, especially in their early stages, tend not to be cash cows. Shocker, I know. I too was blindsided by this news. Now, I didn't go into this for the money, I think that much is obvious. But unfortunately, books, research materials, and equipment aren't free. Please, go to patreon.com/Diogenes Lamp Podcast, and for less than the price of a coffee once a month, you can become a member and get access to bonus episodes, recommended reading lists and documentaries, shout-outs, and anything else we'll offer in the future as this project grows. If you are especially broke, hey, I get it, but please, make sure to give us a 5-star review when you listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to the pod on your preferred podcast listening medium. Your support is appreciated, and more importantly, it is needed in order to keep this operation going. On that note, I hope you have a great day, and now back to the show. My breast was once again filled with turmoil by time's rhythmic rotation, the earth's revolving wheel, the world's 4 faces that are illumined one after the other by the sun, life's passing and our passing with it. The voice of those cranes, echoing once again within me, was the terrible forewarning that this life is unique for each human being, that no other life exists, that we may enjoy it here, that it passes quickly, and that no other opportunity will be given us in the whole of eternity. Hearing this message that is so merciless, yet so filled with mercy, one's mind vows to conquer its own degradation and weakness, to conquer laziness and great futile hopes in order to catch full hold of every split second that is departing forever. Great models come to mind. One sees clearly that he is nothing, his life wasted on small pleasures, small sorrows, unworthy conversations. One cries, for shame, bloodying his lips. Good morning, this is Tom, once again with the Diogenes Lamp podcast, episode number 20, Bread, Olives, King Constantine, Greek Monarchism, part 3. That was a little quote from a favorite book of mine, The Life of Alexis Zorba, or Zorba the Greek, as it's also titled, English version, by Nikos Kazantzakis. Just been reading that lately. Just want to start off and apologize for the little hiatus I had to take there. Life gets busy sometimes, and sometimes you gotta step away. Above all, I love the listeners. I love talking about this kind of stuff, but this is a hobby. And unfortunately, in the U.S. of A., where we are somewhere on the spectrum of being a serf, pretty much, it's important to keep my job and stay busy with work, make sure the big bosses are satisfied with my day job, make sure my life is in order. We do not have any guarantees of healthcare in this country, so what comes first is my day job and everything else that comes with that. This comes second. Until one day, hopefully, years from now, this takes over as my full-time job, which seems like a stretch at this point, but it's nice to dream, right? So that's just want to start off with saying that. Additionally, I want to once again thank our Patreons, paying Patreons, Darth Mater, Megas Yorgos. Thank you guys so much. Your support really helps. It literally goes straight towards paying bills, things that are directly related to me being able to record with you guys today. Additionally, I'm going to be sending you guys out a list of pretty much curated book suggestions. These are books that I've read. They range on topics from everywhere from, you guys can imagine, right? Greek Civil War, modern Greek history, ancient Greek history, international relations, diplomacy in the Middle East, conflicts, all types of stuff. So it's a list of like somewhere between 50 to 100 books. If you guys are listening to this, Darth Mater Megasioros, I hope you enjoy. But, if you guys are, and if you guys are book whores, any of the listeners here, then you definitely will appreciate a nice long list of book suggestions on topics that you enjoy. So let's get on to it and pick back up on this Greek monarchy primer. Oh, and one other thing you guys are probably going to notice about today is I am solo. Basil's busy. Everyone else I've had on is busy. Wasn't able to find a co-host. And I totally get it because I was barely able to make enough time to get back up and started. But it's busy out there, guys, and it's a crazy times we're living in. So stay safe out there. Take care of yourself. Take care of your family. And I'm saying that primarily to people that live in the USA, but I think anywhere in the world it's quite a tumultuous time, to say the least. So it's just me today, and this will be a good test too to see how you guys like the solo. If you're, if you love listening to like Mike Duncan and that kind of thing, then this won't be too much of a stretch. If you're more of like a Lions Led by Donkeys type guy, which is another history kind of comedy podcast, then maybe you won't like the solo, but whatever. If you're into this material, you're into this material. You're more interested into the plot and the story of what's going on all here than anything else. So let's jump into it, guys. So on our last episode, we had the part 2 primer, going through the monarchy and whatnot. Let's talk more today about King Alexander and King Constantine. Mostly King Alexander, but let's get into it nonetheless. So where we are is immediately post Noemvriana, right? King Constantine stepped down in favor of his son, King Alexander, who was barely 24 years old. So let's get to know the new king a bit better. King Alexander was born outside of Athens in 1893 at the Tatui Palace. And from the get-go, he was known kind of as a mischievous kid, doing stuff like setting fires in the palace, scrapping with his older brother George II, and that kind of thing. When he came of age, he studied at the military school Beaton, following in his father's footsteps, let's say, who also studied at the Beaton military school. Immediately after finishing his studies, he served in the Balkan Wars at age 19 as an artillery officer and accompanied his father at the capture of Thessaloniki. He was also known for going out and doing young guy stuff, right? Of course. Dancing, hitting up bars, and that kind of thing. Also, apparently he loved cars, and he was what you would call a gearhead, which is like a sneakerhead and that kind of thing. It's someone who loves cars. So he was known for driving around Athens with his automobile and that kind of thing, which, at the time it's like big deal, but back then it was a bit of a novelty, right? Because we're talking about the early to mid 19 teens in general, when, there weren't a lot of cars back then, right, guys? It was 100 years ago. You get the idea. And, don't even think about or take into account additionally, there weren't a lot of cars in generally in the world, right? Let alone a place like Athens, Greece. So, yeah, that was what we know about him kind of on that personal level. Around 1916, before the November events really started to kick off, Alexander, while out and about doing young prince type stuff, right, meets a really nice girl, Aspasia Manos. Aspasia was the daughter of a Greek colonel, and her family was royalist in terms of political affiliation. But when talking about their family's class in society or strata, they were aristocratic. So aristocratic and royalist. You see, Aspasia's family, similar to Metaxas's, had roots to the vestiges of Byzantium, specifically speaking on both sides of her parents. She had roots to Greek Phanariot families who ruled up in Wallachia and Moldavia, which, if you guys don't know, the Phanariotes were like Greek nobility left over from Byzantium. They served as higher-ups in the Ottoman Empire, diplomats, and merchants, that kind of thing. A lot of them got the axe, of course, during the Greek Civil War. But yeah, that's who her family roots were traced back to. Additionally, she grew up close to the royal family, and Alexander and her were childhood and family friends. So, anyways, time goes on. The Noemvriana happens, which, of course, if you want to know more about the Noemvriana, please give my the episode a listen, the interview with Dr. Dale Pappas. Great episode. In sum, we know what happens with the Noemvriana, right? When it's all said and done, the Entente powers, the man King Constantine, step down, and the king's second son takes the throne, that being Alexander. George II, who was actually older, got passed up because he was deemed not the right fit by the Entente, right? It's at this point in our story where all those Constantinists were exiled. You remember from our first primer episodes when Metaxas and Gunaris and his crew were all exiled to Corsica, and King Constantine ended up in Switzerland. King Alexander said goodbye to his father, now the ex-king, and his father warned him to be careful of Venizelos, which Alexander was sure to stay suspicious of Venizelos for the rest of his time. And with good reason, mind you guys. We're talking about a political climate immediately following what was essentially a low-grade civil war and coup orchestrated by Venizelos. So, duh. The fact that the king was treated like a puppet didn't help, and Alexander often complained to friends of his that he felt more like a prisoner than a king, and had often mentioned that he considered resigning altogether and just retiring to a normal life. Apparently, Venizelos would do things like lecture him for hours on the Constitution, which is boring, but also more directly threatening things to Alexander, like removing many close associates of Alexander's father from the king's circle, and even preventing the king from communicating with people who could be deemed too close to the king's former circle. He, in many cases, had become a puppet king, with Venizelos being a puppet master of sorts. With that being said, the king still did have some power. That being his position deemed him responsible to sign off on new decrees passed by parliament and that kind of stuff. So he did his best to drag his ass on doing these basic things, and sometimes he refused outright, kind of as a way to cause stress to Venizelos and show that he still had some power in his position, right? A lot of authors like Michael Llewelyn-Smith in his book Ionian Vision chalk this up to Alexander just having more of a passion of fast cars than being a royal, which, okay, perhaps. But maybe he also just wasn't in the best of moods to do his job with great enthusiasm, let's say, considering he was practically alone and being forced to work with a man who was primarily responsible for his family's exile. Not the best of work environments, right? My supervisor exiled my fam, right? Not great. So you get the idea. So the world around Alexander keeps moving on, but this time Venizelos is at the head of it, let's say. And the Greek army is now fully on board with the Entente, and 3 full divisions helped out with the Allied victory over Bulgarian forces in May of 1918. But we'll get to that another time. Let's stick to our story's main character for now, King Alexander. At the time, his relationship with Aspasia Manos was still a bit taboo. After all, she was aristocratic, sure, but she was by no means royal. So Venizelos and even the rest of the royal family were very much not on board with Alexander marrying what was to them a commoner. But on the flip side, and this was taken into consideration by a few personalities at the time, Aspasia Manos was Greek, a blue-blooded Greek. And say what you will about the royals who were born in Greece, spoke Greek, very proud to be Greek through and through, and whatnot. They were not ethnically Greek. None of the royals were ethnically Greek. They were all a hodgepodge of European royalty. I mean, his family's house, Glucksburg, is a mix of Danish and German ancestry. Glucksburg. Very Greek-sounding name to you? His grandmother Olga was Russian with direct links to the Tsars in Moscow at the time. His mother, Princess Sophie of Prussia, was German and was the sister of the Kaiser, for Christ's sake. And all his aunts and uncles had married other European royalty. In fact, just looking at a royal family tree, and I'll attach in the show notes the link for the official royal family tree, you can look at it yourself. Very few other family members across the tree ever married anyone Greek, ethnically Greek. Only other person I could find was King Constantine's younger sister, Princess Maria, whose second husband, the first husband was some Grand Duke George of Russia, was a Greek admiral, Pericles Ioannidis. And this is Princess Maria, who was born in 1876, if anyone is interested. I'm sure there are one or two maybe I'm missing elsewhere. It is a giant family after all. So I don't know. Let me know if you guys found any other ones. I could not on my end though. So yeah, it's a bit ironic that the royal family, who is 0% ethnically Greek, is up in arms about King Alexander marrying what they considered a Greek peasant, especially at a time when the Megali idea, the grand idea, is still at play, with a king named Alexander. Get it? Alexander the Great. Like, you'd think they'd be like, oh, this is great. We can get some Hellenic blood in this inbred European family. But no, royals are a bit weird with that stuff, and they were very much not down for the marriage. Anyways, this drama keeps unfolding, all while Alexander is feeling all the more lonely in Athens, because he is alone in Athens. But he has Aspasia, who really provides some sense of security and assurance in a part of his life where there's very little of that. And as we'll see, Alexander wouldn't be discouraged. Shortly after the Greek troops landed in Smyrna in May of 1919, Alexander wrote to Venizelos, who was in Paris at the time, that, quote, I desire to combine the national rejoicing with what is for me an especially happy event, and which is moreover in accordance with the ideas which you have repeatedly expressed about making the dynasty a national institution. I want to stress that last part, a national institution. In sum, the king is giving a heads up to Venizelos that, hey, I'm going to marry this girl. Venizelos tried his best to talk down the young whippersnapper from what he considered a cliff, telling him to just wait a little longer and that the next time they're together, they'll have a sit down and they'll give this whole situation a real genuine consideration. Alexander, probably seeing that this was a, crock of shit at worst and at best just a delay tactic from the wily old Venizelos, thought, what would Venizelos do? And decided to call the old man's bluff. And in November of 1919, King Alexander pulled off a fait accompli and got married to Aspasia Manos in secret. Venizelos wasn't especially happy about this, and while there is some speculation about who the leaker actually was, apparently it was Venizelos himself who decided to slowly leak out info of the marriage to the press to kind of gauge the public response to the event. This leak happened sometime around spring of 1920. In the meantime, though, Aspasia was not even allowed to live in the Tatui Palace with King Alexander, due to suspicions from the Venizelos that King Alexander would be able to link up with other royalists through Aspasia. Like he could use her family as a conduit to communicate with Alexander's family and other Constantinists in exile. Keep in mind, she was from aristocratic royalist family. Royalist. And again, this was right after the Noemvriana. The divide was still hot. But time can sometimes help, and slowly, personal tensions between Venizelos and Alexander seemed to soften up a tiny bit. And in July of that same year, Venizelos sent the king to visit the recently acquired regions of eastern Macedonia and western Thrace, where he attended a parade in the city of Dedegash. The city was renamed Alexandroupolis, a proper Hellenic name, in honor of the young King Alexander, which, for those of you who don't know, Alexandroupolis is right on the border with Turkey. Things keep heating up in Alexander's life, and after some drama about the public's reaction to finding out about him getting married to Aspasia, who was then banned from Greece and had to stay in Paris for a while, King Alexander's wife was allowed to come back to Athens and stay in Tatui Palace, where she was known for the time being as Madame Aspasia, not Queen Aspasia. Which, I don't know about you guys, but was just super cringe just hearing the Madame instead of Queen, but whatever, right? This partly has to do with the fact that King Alexander and Aspasia got married without the permission of the archbishop. So while the marriage was illegal, it wasn't entirely kosher, let's say. And anyone listening to this who has ever been married in Greece can appreciate this, because getting married in Greece with a priest is not an easy task. And I say this as practically just a peasant, right? A commoner, when compared to someone whose social class is on the same level as Alexander, King Alexander, let alone Aspasia. It's probably it's probably even way more complicated. You can imagine the protocols that they had to go through. Anyways, you get the picture, right? So if you've been paying attention to the timetable we've been treading through so far, and you remember anything from primer episodes 1 and 2, or just whatever, you have a general idea of Greek history at this time, then you should be thinking something along the lines right now of, oh shit, it's fall time of 1920, and shit is going down, right? We already know what the Greek troops are doing in Smyrna and Eastern Thrace and whatnot. Venizelos is in power. Did I mention it's fall time in 1922? So what comes next, of course, right? Monkey business, okay? Monkey business, people. King Alexander, sometimes known as Akakomiri, which Akakomiri in Greek means kind of like someone, it literally translates to bad-fated one, the ill-fated one. And I think it's a fitting name for King Alexander, right? We already know what comes next. First, we got the glorious Treaty of Severus, signed in August of 1920, a wet dream for Greeks and Armenians alike, a nightmare for the Turks. Then it happens. In early October of this same year, King Alexander breaks up a scuffle between his wolfhound, some sources say a German shepherd, whatever his breed was, his name was Fritz. And in the process of the king trying to pry this monkey out of Fritz's mouth, the monkey's spouse, the Mr. Monkey, comes to the defense of Fritz, perhaps, or his wife. We don't know exactly. Maybe the king had something very. He was on the Fritz, let's say, with his wife, and was conspiring with the dog to get rid of his wife. Who knows, right? The monkey bites the shit out of the king's leg in the process. Who knows? Maybe the monkey was a Turkish agent, for all we know, right? Anyways, that's just some jokes. So, yeah, bites the king's leg. The king is like, "'Tis but a scratch," right? Like Monty Python or whatever. And the king thinks little of it. But keep in mind that like getting bit by a monkey today comes with its own very serious complications like diseases and whatnot. And it's 1920s, so you can just catch some random disease or virus and shit yourself to death at this time in history, right? So this guy got bit by a monkey. Fever starts to set in, and the king realizes that this is definitely not just a scratch. And either out of the realization that he might die soon or just feeling a bit nervous, he requests the presence of people like his parents and other family members. But all of these requests are denied by Venizelos and his advisors. Again, out of fear of a return of the king or the monarchy, as in a monarchy that isn't a puppet to Venizelos, of course. In the very end, only the king's beloved Aspasia was by his side until his death, and the king died at age 27th on October 25th of 1920. The only family member that was allowed to try to make it to the King Alexander's deathbed was his grandmother, the Queen Dowager, Olga, which for you people, like normal people who don't know what this weird royal lingo is, dowager or dowager, however you say it, is just a fancy word for widow. Because remember, Olga's husband and Alexander's grandfather, King George I, got assassinated in Thessaloniki shortly after its liberation in 1913. His poor grandmother arrived just a few hours too late due to bad weather in the Adriatic Sea. His wife Aspasia was 5 months pregnant with his future daughter, Alexandra. Now, once a king dies, we all know the biggest question that comes immediately to the forefront of everyone's mind. Succession, of course. Who's going to take over next? Now, also keep in mind that things are a bit messy. Like, usually, but definitely not always, you have the oldest person or most senior on the throne take the throne, okay? Like how we had King George I, then King Constantine. But the Noemvriana kind of threw a monkey wrench, no pun intended, when the Intante opted for the second youngest of the three male siblings. George II was 3 years older than King Alexander. Combine this with the crossroads the Greek state, and especially Venizelos, is at. Greek troops are currently occupying Asia Minor, marching towards the dream, let's say, liberating Asia Minor from the bloodthirsty Turks, or invading if you are a Turk. While this is going on, there's the complexity of the entire thing of it. Lloyd George, Superphil Hellene wanting the Greeks to help him give it to the Turks and establish this super special generational relationship between the Greeks and the Brits, the French watching out for their interests in Asia Minor, the Italians doing what's best for them, and of course the Turks fighting for what they believe is their homeland from invading imperialist powers. Probably invading Yaur powers as well, if you go ahead and give the book a 30-year genocide a listen as well, which is a great book, and I've been listening to a lot as well. So yeah, and of course, the whole idea of, not to go in a rabbit hole, but the whole idea of, the former slaves, the Greeks, now invading Turkey, really drove the Turks insane. So you get the idea. Not to mention, we have the Russians, which are going through their Bolshevik revolution at the time. You guys get the idea. There's a lot of shit going on. The Asia Minor campaign is so complicated. There's so many moving parts into it. Never let anyone give you some silly Ataturk meme or something like that and try to simplify it. It's a very complex thing going on. There's a lot of moving parts. You get the idea. So there are three big routes the Greek state can go. Bring back the monarchy, which begs the question of who to bring back. Abolish the monarchy and establish a republic. Or swap out the royal house. As in, instead of having that German-Dutch Glücksburg dynasty, get like a British royal house, like trading in your Elantra for a Sonata, right? Or your RAV4 for a Forerunner or whatever. You get the idea, right? Venizelos was a bit nervous that becoming a formal republic would piss off the British, who, keep in mind, were the biggest bankroller of the Asia Minor campaign right now, and whose support was paramount in this whole Asia Minor project. Also, monarchism as a political and cultural force was still pretty strong in Greece at the time, so it's not like abolishing the monarchy would have been politically expedient and could have come off as a bit tyrannical, a charge that Venizelos was already having thrown at him. The first go-to option considered was to bring back Paul, the youngest son of the former King Constantine. But Paul, who was in exile at Switzerland at the time, refused outright, on the grounds that neither his father, ex-King Constantine, nor his older brother, King George II, had renounced their claim to the throne. The other big problem is that there were elections coming up in November of the same year, 1920. And aside from the royalists initially running on a small but honest Greece, bring the boys home kind of stuff, and end the unnecessary war, which, as we'll see, they'll pivot from this later on, right? There was also the issue that if the royalists won, this would immediately piss off the French, especially the French. Because remember, the Noemvriana events and the stance of the monarch in World War I wanting to remain neutral. Again, give that episode with Dr. Dale Pappas on the Noemvriana listen. And, like for me anyways, when I first was reading about this whole situation and the opposition to Venizelos, I was like, what the fuck? Like how could you be opposed as a Greek in 1920 to practically the shot at retaking Constantinople and other parts of Asia Minor after hearing for years of the massacres and genocides of your ethnic brethren on the other side of the Aegean? Like what's going on? But this is where we really need to empathize and look past some of our nationalistic mindsets and take off our hindsight glasses, this lens some of us might have, where we automatically say to ourselves, oh, if only Greece had succeeded in the Asia Minor campaign, Greece would be so much better off today, yada, yada, yada. And remove all of this so we can put ourselves in the shoes of people back then, in the fall of 1920. At this point, Greece had been in one war or another at least since 1912, almost non-stop. This includes Balkan Wars I, II, World War I, and the current ongoing Asia Minor campaign. If we go ahead and include the struggle for Macedonia and the Black 30-Day War 1897, we're talking about war, conflict, save a 5-year gap here and whatnot, for 20 or so years. And as an American who was a middle schooler when 9/11 happened and the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq started up, I can say, and maybe you can too, that I understand that people back then were tired of war, fatigued, especially given that the economic situation was not great at home. As Cicero said, armed forces abroad are of little value unless there's prudent counsel at home. Once again, thank you, Rome Total War loading screen, for that one. And don't just take it from me, of course. There's a great take on the situation that gives the sentiments of the home situation from a General Douglas, okay? And quote, I admit that the internal situation has not been and could not be rosy in the stormy situation. I admit that profiteering has raised its ugly head, and that the prices of all sorts of goods have risen excessively. I admit that the administration has not been able to satisfy completely all the needs of the country. I admit that many functionaries, various branches of the administration, have not risen to the demands of their position. But if you consider that these evils have occurred not only in Greece, but in all the belligerent and even neutral states, and in some of them indeed to a much greater degree consider that they were an unavoidable consequence of the terrible World War, and we considered that the Prime Minister was almost continuously absent from the country engaged in the handling of the main national question, and that the ministries were surrounded by so many departments of one sort or another, organized and staffed by a mass of civil servants, lacking the necessary experience, you will be charitable in your judgments, and will thank God that such great gains have been won in the national question for such relatively slight disadvantages. End quote. So, I mean, take from that quote what you will, but what I walk away from it with is, yes, things are bad at home, but you can make the argument too that it's worth it all if it means fulfilling the dreams and aspirations of the Megali there, right? You get the idea. So yeah, that's it for today. That's where we're gonna leave off. It's the end of part 3, episode 20. Next time we'll cover the elections of 1920, perhaps the most consequential elections in modern Greek history, which will pave the way, arguably anyways, for the Asia Minor disaster. Take care, everyone. Have a good one. Adios.